When it comes to Wall Street, many people think of money and greed. But a professor at Harvard Business School argues there's a lot more to the world of finance, and he uses books and movies to make his case. Our economics correspondent Paul Salman has the story. It's part of our series, Making Sense, which airs every Thursday.
The field of finance. You might say it has an image problem. Consider The Wolf of Wall Street, based on a real-life character.
Now, if anyone here thinks I'm superficial or materialistic, go get a job at McDonald's, because that's where you belong.
Investment banker Patrick Bateman in American Psycho is fictional, but not entirely implausible.
I have all the characteristics of a human being. Flesh, blood, skin, hair. But not a single clear, identifiable emotion, except for greed and disgust.
I am not a destroyer of companies.
Hey, finance has had an image problem since buyout bro Gordon Gekko graced the silver screen 30 years ago.
The point is, ladies and gentlemen, that greed, for lack of a better word, is good.
Big bank, small bank, I like to make money. All right?
And the real events of the 2008 financial crisis only made matters worse.
That's America's housing market.
But Harvard Business School's Mihir Desai says there are two faces to finance, though he readily acknowledges the dark one to his students.
Many people demonize what you do, and it's hard to live that way.
And he told me he gets why that perception is so pervasive.
When you have real-life figures like Martin Shkreli, who was both a hedge fund trader and then took over a pharmaceutical company, jacked up prices by 5,000%, subsequently engaged in a variety of nefarious behavior, and very proudly so. So, it almost makes you feel like real life is outpacing fiction.
Desai has written a book to try to balance the picture, The Wisdom of Finance.
The goal in the book is to try to demystify finance so that the people who currently demonize it will come to understand it, as opposed to simply oppose it. And then for the people who are in finance, we have to get back to the ideas. The ideas matter.
To Professor Desai, the big idea of finance is illustrated by the quincunx machine in Boston's Museum of Science. The ability to find order in a seemingly random and therefore risk-forsaken world.
This was a real revolution in probability, which is random things happening results in predictable patterns.
Balls drop, bounce randomly left or right as they encounter the pins, and eventually hit bottom to form a bell-shaped curve.
Things that seem random actually end up resulting in a very orderly pattern. In fact, this bell-shaped distribution or normal distribution. And that, of course, is the foundation of finance, which is you observe a lot of random things, but it ends up behaving in predictable ways.
Randomness and its risks are everywhere. Finance's job to try to manage them. Case in point, the income plight of women throughout most of history.
You should consider that it is by no means certain that another offer of marriage may ever be made to you.
Mr. Collins, who delivers the worst proposal ever to Lizzie Bennet in Pride and Prejudice.
I am well aware that £1,000 in the 4% is all you may ever be entitled to, but rest assured, I shall never reproach on that score when we are married.
You're not that wealthy. You're not that pretty. You have an offer on the table today from me. You better take it.
It's the great economic risk faced by all of Jane Austen's Bennet girls. But, says Desai,
Lizzie turns down Mr. Collins and the advice of her mother because she wants to roll the dice again. Of course, that ends up very nicely, ultimately, with Mr. Darcy, but at the time she didn't know.
No, Lizzie was lucky in love and money. She accepted the risk, but most others did not.
The next day, he gives the same proposal to Charlotte, her friend, and she takes it.
Cousin Elizabeth, you can see before you the happiest of men.
Charlotte Lucas's lot was not the happiest, but better than penury, one imagines.
She said, I'm just going to take this solution.
And Anthony Trollope's Phineas Finn.
How nice to find you, and to find you alone.
Violet Effingham had a very different problem. Too many suitors.
You look very piratical tonight, Lord Chiltern.
That is because you see me by the side of all these smug, glossy Parliament men.
She doesn't know who to choose. And she says, if only I could marry all 10. which is the essence of diversification.
Because then you wouldn't have all your eggs in one basket. You would have 10 different guys, 10 different fortunes.
Exactly. The intuition that you can lower risk by dividing resources is extremely old. That diversification idea goes back to shipping, when you split up your cargo across routes. It goes back to agriculture, when people would split up their land. In Ecclesiastes, we see the advice to invest in 8 ventures, because you never know what disaster will happen.
So this is the benign face of finance. It allows you to protect against risk by, among other things, diversifying your investments. But then there's the dark face again. When you invest, you're still stuck with the risk of giving your money to someone else.
I gave my money to Tim Cook, who runs Apple, and I own 1 share. Here's the problem. I can't watch Tim Cook. So the underlying problem becomes, well, wait a second, how do I monitor that guy? How do I watch that guy? How do I make sure he's doing the right thing for me?
This is the principal-agent problem. The principal is the shareholder who has the wealth. The agent is the manager entrusted with it.
If you only knew what I went through for you.
And principals and agents can have conflicting interests. In the case of the producers, extremely conflicting.
It's absolutely amazing. But under the right circumstances, a producer could make more money with a flop than he could with a hit.
The essence of the producers is that these 2 folks, Bialystok and Bloom, want to rip off a bunch of investors. And by creating a flop, the investors won't want their money back. They raise 25,000% of what they actually need. They create this, what they think is going to be a flop, Springtime for Hitler.
Springtime for Hitler and Germany.
And of course, it becomes a hit, and they go to jail. These investors trusted Bialystok and Bloom. They couldn't actually monitor them. They turned out to be bad eggs. That is the problem of capital markets. That is the problem of me giving money to people and not knowing what they end up doing.
But of course, for every Bialystok, there's a Buffett. For every Bernie Madoff, 1,000 honest brokers. Because there have always been 2 faces of finance.
This is actually my favorite book about finance. It's from 1688.
And it was a good year for finance.
And it was Confusiones de Confusiones. He basically describes finance as the most noble profession as well as the most notorious profession. I think we've lost sense of the nobility part that he describes, and we tend to focus on the negative.
Desai, wanting to accentuate the positive, uses an exemplar of finance from Willa Cather's 19th century novel, O Pioneers.
Alexandra Berkson is this wonderful character who is a farmer who starts by basically doing a leveraged buyout of farms near where she lives.
She borrows money in order to buy
She
them.
borrows a bunch of money to buy all these farms.
Now, I figured it out. We sell most of the cattle, and what corn we have left over, we buy the Lindstrom place. Then we take out 2 loans on our half section and buy Peter Crow's place.
She ends up engaging in transactions that would be in any finance textbook, but she never loses sight of who she is. She never behaves in ways that would suggest that she thinks everything is due to her skill as opposed to luck. She's very conscious of and very humble of her outcome.
You've worked wonders with this land, Alexandra.
Oh, he hadn't any of us much to do with it, Carl. The land did it.
We really need good stories about finance, because good stories will guide good behavior.
It's a lesson Desai tries to teach his students.
Pick your stories carefully, because you'll live your life by these stories. Some of you might pick Gordon Gekko. I don't recommend it. Alexandra Berkson is a fantastic model.
For the PBS NewsHour, this is economics correspondent Paul Solman reporting from Boston.
Who knew by watching all these films that you could get great economic advice? So while writing his book, Professor Desai says he was surprised to discover how many great writers, painters, and musicians also held jobs in finance. You can test your own knowledge of these entrepreneurial artists with our online quiz at pbs.org/newshour.